Electric screwdrivers. Are they the tool I didn't know I needed until my subscribers told me about them? Or an overpriced solution to a problem that doesn't really exist? I've had these two knocking about my workshop for a few weeks now to try and find out what's better. The expensive one, the cheap one, or none of them at all. So the two screwdrivers that I've been testing are this generic one from AliExpress for around £13 or $15, and this expensive model by Secure, the SQ-ES126, which I bought for around £80 or $95. The cheap one didn't come with any bits, but they are an optional extra for around £3. The expensive one came with a box of bits, which actually was quite handy, and a basic kind of normal screwdriver that I've never actually used. It looks terrible, I wouldn't go near it. In case you were thinking though that £80 is quite a lot, there is actually a more expensive model called the ES15, which you can get for around £125 or $150. But I don't own that one. I've used the two that I do have for all sorts of general 3D printing work and for assembling the Voron V2.4R2, which I've now just about finished. As I mentioned, I was told about these screwdrivers through my YouTube live chat while streaming. I thought it was really interesting actually that the only things anyone really mentioned when telling me about them was which one had the better torque and which model was the faster speed. From my experience of these two models, the torque and speed are pretty similar. This means they'll screw to a similar tightness and take about the same time to do it. And that's also about the same time as doing it by hand. You'll note here that I've not measured them precisely for an objective comparison because I actually don't think it really matters. The reason for this is that neither can actually measure torque, so they can't stop at the correct point for that screw type. The maximum will be limited by your grip of the device, which isn't actually very easy to change as it tightens, so won't be a very strong grip, and applying more torque is not better, as over torque can cause damage. In my opinion, torque settings only need to be high enough to overcome any prevailing torque fasteners like nylock nuts. Tightening the screw to the final torque should either be done manually, kind of by hand, or kind of by hand but using a torque limiting device. One thing I do want to mention as a side note is that when no button is pressed on these screwdrivers, it basically locks the rotation in place. I don't know how they do it, but they do. So for that final torque by hand, you can easily do it without switching to another screwdriver. The other common point of criticism seems to be noise levels. In this case, the cheap one is louder than its more expensive brother, but not to the point that it matters, unless you're doing printer maintenance with your newborn child on your lap, which I can't say is something I'd recommend. In my opinion, noise levels for both of these devices was well within any acceptable limits. Before we talk about battery life and ease of use, I want to let you know that my threaded heat insert press thing is now available for pre-order. It's a great companion for those assembling wrap rig or Voron printers or other things that need lots of threaded inserts where you want them nice and straight every single time. Anyway, where were we? I remember, battery life. With quite long assembly live streams, sometimes upwards of 3 hours, one of my concerns with using an electric screwdriver was battery life. That's not a concern I have anymore though. Both of these were able to run for plenty of time to do live streams and way more. If you do a single long screw for some reason it is like a meter long or something, this might be a different story, but for lots of short screws spread over a pretty long period of time, they both have plenty of power. To recharge, it's simply a USB-C cable in the end, but if I recall correctly, both suggest not continuing to use them while charging. Probably because it'll pull loads of power through the USB and damage something. Again, as you will probably run out of energy before your screwdriver, a simple stand to recharge would probably be more than enough. This is where the competition starts to get serious, because in my opinion, when it comes to handheld tools, general ease of use is one of, if not the most important factors when determining how good a tool is. Firstly, the tip magnet, useful for holding the bits to the driver and for holding the screws to those bits. Both of these drivers do have a magnet, which is a good start, but the expensive driver's magnet is so much weaker. Screws will just fall off and bits will get stuck in screws instead of pulling out with the driver if you have it at just like the slightest angle. The cheap screwdriver, on the other hand, is maybe about 80 to 90% strength of what I have in my iFixit screwdriver, which I'm considering basically a benchmark for this. Next is the activation button position. This is important because it determines how you grip the screwdriver and then activate the rotation of the bits. If it's in the wrong place, not only does it leave the driver like unbalanced in your hand, but you have to shuffle your hand around to switch between like the activation and the tight grip. Neither driver is perfect in this respect because they don't have a 360-degree switch, so you pretty much always have to rotate it to the right angle. But the cheap driver is significantly better because the button is at least at the right end of the screwdriver. The additional thing you have to worry about with the expensive driver is that you also have to rotate it to activate the motor. This is meant to be a premium feature, but personally I think it's kind of annoying, especially if your screw is like just balanced on the end of your driver as you try and insert it, and then like a tiny bit of hand rotation and it falls off. This feature also has settings in the LCD menu, but I've totally forgotten how to access those properly, so all of those settings are all but useless at this point. For me, more settings is not better. One feature that I was surprised to see that both of these screwdrivers share is a light. Surprised because I've never really needed a light, but then I'm always in kind of a studio lit room. If you have the option for increased ambient light, always use that first, but if you're in an area where you can't add light or light is at a premium, this could be a pretty useful feature. The colour, evenness and brightness of the LED are all better on the cheap screwdriver. It's also easier to use as it's just a single press and it stays on, instead of having to hold the button down, which also activates the driver when you rotate it. So you can imagine if you're trying to add a screw into a dark area, you have to hold the button, any then slight rotation of your hand starts it spinning and your screw is going to be lost. Brilliant. The final word on ease of use is the grip. It's hard to choose a winner here because neither of these handles really are perfect because they're not knurled like the iFixit driver, so they both require pretty much a full hand grip to get a good grip. The body of the expensive driver is a little bit thicker, which makes it harder to hold in your fingers, but it is nice and short at least. The thinner handle of the cheaper unit is definitely my preference, but it's also a little bit long, making it hard to bury the butt of the driver into your palm in order to apply any pressure. Undoubtedly, the more expensive option here is better built. However, I think if I drop both down the stairs, the additional weight of the more expensive unit might actually cause it to take more damage. That's not really a test I'm willing to do, but I would say that both of these are sufficient for my home DIY use case for small and medium electronics projects. They're both fairly durable. The aluminium bodies don't bend or flex under any like gripping pressure, and both have been able to supply like appropriate torque for anything up to like M5 screws. One thing I would say though is don't use these as a leverage tool like you might with some big steel flathead drivers. These are specifically for driving screws in under gentle pressure, not for any levering, bending or twisting. Through testing these drivers, I quite often felt like I was using them for like the wrong application. The design features and functionality just didn't seem to quite match what I was trying to do. Either this is down to poor design or they're intended for a different use case. If you spend more time working with your screwdriver just vertically for things like phone and laptop repairs, for example, your experience could be quite different to mine. So just bear that in mind when you hear what I have to say about them. One of the biggest takeaways I had from this experience though is accessibility. I'm 30 and already get pains and aches in my hands with repetitive tasks like rotating a screwdriver, especially if that task also requires high torque and or high speed. Going through this whole testing process and trying out these drivers, I did start to realize that an electric screwdriver was often best applied when my hands were beginning to hurt and I couldn't use a normal screwdriver anymore. The minimal hand movement needed to just like screw in a screwdriver by pressing a button gave my hands a bit of a chance to rest while I could still get a decent amount of work done. If you also suffer from similar pains, then I know you'll find it good use of having like this tool in your toolbox, even if you don't use it every single day. Neither of these electric screwdrivers really blew me away at all. My expectations from the start were never that high, and I often found myself wanting to return to a normal manual method for its improved precision and that kind of tactile feedback. That being said, if you do suffer from aches and pains from repetitive motion, this might allow you to work for a little bit longer than normal. If your heart is set on getting one though, definitely go for the cheaper option. It's just as good, if not better, than the expensive one. And when you realise in a couple of months that you actually didn't need it and the manual one is better for most applications, you'll only be like £13 to £15 out of pocket. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to check out threaded heat insert press at vector3d.co.uk, and I'll see you in the next one.